If you would like to listen to or download any or all of Power at Work's blogcasts in podcast form, they are available for streaming and download on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. Just search Power at Work on any podcast platform and enjoy all of Power at Work's podcasts. While you're there, two things we would like you to do. First, subscribe, and that way you won't miss any Power at Work podcasts. Second, please give Power at Work a 5-star rating, a like, a love, whatever is the tool that your podcast provider gives you. It helps others who care about workers and worker power to find Power at Work's content. They will be grateful, and so will we. Hello, powerful people, and welcome back to the Power Half Hour on Power at Work and live on LinkedIn. I'm Seth Harris from the Burns Center for Social Change. The Power Half Hour brings you more voices, more news, and more worker power insights in just 30 minutes. I've got an expert panel of 3 guests who I will introduce you to in just a moment. The panelists will talk about the big stories and big developments affecting worker power, workers, and unions that have occurred over the last couple of weeks. And they'll also talk about important worker power developments to come in the near-term future. And then at the very end, we will offer our guests a genuinely measly thank you, but still heartfelt. It's small, but it's deeply heartfelt. A little gift called Shameless Plugs and Shoutouts. They can shout out or promote anything they would like, and self-promotion is enthusiastically encouraged. And then, audience, if you're hungry for more, stay with us for the Power Half Hour overtime. We will take questions and comments from the live audience on LinkedIn, but also from the Power at Work community. We've had people emailing us questions during the course of the last 2 weeks, so we will ask those questions of our panelists here today in overtime. That will happen in about 28 minutes from now. But one more thing before I introduce you to the people who are going to make you smarter today. Audience, stay up to date with Power Half Hour by following the Power at Work LinkedIn page. When you're done with this show, please go over to the Power at Work page and follow us there. You should also subscribe to Power at Work. Go to poweratwork.us and you can give us your name and email address, and we will subscribe you to all the information from Power at Work. We promise we will not give away or sell your information at all. Okay, let's meet our panel. From the People's Republic of Ithaca, New York, she's the very, very recently retired Director of Labor Education and Senior Lecturer at Cornell University's School of Industrial and Labor Relations. It's Kate Bronfenbrenner. Hi, Kate.
Hi, great to be here.
Great to have you here. And from our nation's capital, he's the founder and coordinator of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and the executive director of the Labor Heritage Foundation and a whole bunch of other titles. We don't have time for all of Garlock's titles. I got to be honest with you. It's only a 30-minute show, but it's our great friend, Chris Garlock. Welcome back, Chris.
Always good to be with you from the People's Republic of Tacoma Park.
Oh, my. Well, you know, it's just it's one big socialist group, except from the city that begins the West, Fort Worth, Texas. He's a professor of law and the director of the Workplace Law Program at Texas A&M School of Law. It's my old colleague, Michael Z. Green. Welcome back, Professor.
Oh, thank you, Seth. Happy to be here. Such a great group of panelists. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
And we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say in this discussion. Thanks for being here. All right, topic number 1, panel, and I'm going to start with you, Kate. Looking over your shoulder or looking in the rear view mirror, tell us what was the most important or the most interesting development or the biggest news story affecting workers, worker power, and unions over the last couple of weeks. Kate.
Well, I think that one of the most interesting stories is both the strike vote that happened at Denver Processing this week in Colorado, 97% strike vote, which follows on the heel of the strike at meatpackers at JBS in Greeley, Colorado, where 3,600 workers went on strike and were able to win important gains in personal protective gear, which is very important if you remember that this was a workplace. The meatpacking industry was devastated during COVID. Trump did this executive order that exempted them from OSHA, both inspections, but also required them to work even when they were sick. It was done at the behest of the industry to protect their liability, and upwards of 60,000 and counting workers got COVID, close to 300 died, and that doesn't even count the tens of thousands of community members that were affected because workers were forced to work sick and then go home, and were not given protective gear. This is the first international union sanctioned strike in meatpacking in over 40 years. Although 1,000 workers at JBS walked out during COVID because of lack of protections, but that was not an official union sanctioned strike. And I think it's interesting it's happening in Colorado. It's happening this time with a group that's almost all immigrant workers and Black workers, the most vulnerable workers, happening in a part of the country we don't usually talk about. And I think it encapsulates the increased anger of the workers, but also public support. 70% public support for the strikers. So I think there hasn't been a lot of coverage of this, and I think it's a very important story.
No, I agree with you completely. It is very important. And I had not remembered what had happened during COVID, even though I was in the White House when it was happening. You brought back those memories of just a truly terrible time for those workers. And I remain perplexed by employers in the food industry who insist on sick workers coming to work. It seems like a tremendously terrible idea for public health, but also for their brand and for their products. It's a crazy thing, and it happens all over the country, particularly in states that don't have paid family medical leave, paid sick leave. It's really a crazy thing. Okay, Michael, most important development over the last couple of weeks, worker power unions. What do you think?
All right, so Seth, I feel like I'm a cagey veteran in answering this question now, and I'm going to give you probably the same answer that I've said before. And when you ask this, it's kind of like if you have like 3 or 4 kids and you're asked to pick your favorite kid. There is such a smorgasbord of things going on out there. As you know, being in Texas, I am very much interested in how the Fifth Circuit keeps getting these cases that involve labor issues. The Amazon case was just recently appealed to the Fifth Circuit, which involves Staten Island workers. How's that in the Fifth Circuit? There's just another case about subpoenas, NLRB subpoenas, and that involves a California Starbucks, but that's in the Fifth Circuit. How do these cases get in the Fifth Circuit? I don't know. That's kind of a general concern of mine. It'll probably keep coming up. But there's one thing that I wanted to highlight was there was a recent decision involving Starbucks by the NLRB, by the board, with the 2 Republican members highlighting this issue of decertification petitions. And what happens when you have unfair labor practices going on all over the case? And, that's been well documented as what happened in Starbucks with the number of unfair labor practices that were going on. And yet, if you don't ever get to the bargaining table, you don't ever get a contract, eventually the workers get frustrated by what's going on. And it's not necessarily because of the union, it's because of all these unfair labor practices. So the board just issued a decision where the 2 Republican members raised questions about the board's practice of blocking charges when there's a decertification petition and just blocking the charge from going forward, and suggested there should be more of a hearing and a discussion of that, which feeds the National Right to Work Foundation's efforts to represent these individual employees in decertifying. So that's
just to clarify, a blocking charge. Explain to our audience what a blocking charge is. That's a term of art in labor law.
Yeah, that's true. So if you're in the midst of a issue involving an unfair labor practice being charged against the employer, the question then is, if an election petition is filed, in this instance, a decertification election, where you get some employees who are saying we're unhappy now with the union, we want to decertify the union. If there's pending an unfair labor practice charge, that blocks the process for holding an election until you can resolve that unfair labor practice charge. So sometimes referred to as a blocking charge. And the NLRB has taken a position. It's even if there's even not just a blocking charge, but even if there's enough information there, that they'll just dismiss that petition. And that's been considered controversial now by the 2 Republican members, which will just open the door to more of these decertification petitions. Anytime you have voted in a union, the employer fights it, commits unfair labor practices, dissipates the interest, and then allows these decertification petitions to go forward.
Good. Very interesting. Thank you for raising that up. That is a very, very, very important change made possible by having a Republican president who appointed 2 Republican members to the board who now are in the majority. It's a 2-1 Republican majority. The one Democrat who's there is Dave Prouty, and his term ends in August. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. All right, Chris, hit us with the most important development for workers, worker power, and unions over the last 2 weeks.
Like I'm batting cleanup here. So I guess the thing I've been paying attention to is how labor stories are breaking through culturally. You got films, music, theater, podcasts. Workers not just organizing on the job, they're shaping the narrative, and I think that's a real shift. I got 2 quick examples for you. Just last Friday in Durham, North Carolina, highlights from the jazz labor opera, yes, the jazz labor opera, Love Songs from the Liberation Wars, was performed. And that tells the story of black and white workers who organized together in Winston-Salem's tobacco factories back in the 1940s and the broader political mobilization of the black community. And that's labor history reaching people not as a lecture, but as lived culture. And I think that's incredibly powerful. We have a lot of other examples of that as well. The other thing is that we're seeing it in how people are reclaiming labor history locally. And there's been an incredible response to Labor Heritage Foundation's new online labor landmarks database, laborheritage.org. We've had dozens and dozens of sites added across the country since we launched it just last month. And one example just came in last Friday, the gravesite of Ralph Chaplin, who I think you guys are going to recognize, author of Solidarity Forever. And Seth, you know that well, because how many versions of Solidarity did you find for your Grammys last year?
We nominated at least 8, but I probably listened to 50 different versions of Solidarity Forever to call that list.
Well, it turns out that Ralph is buried in the other Tacoma, Washington. And, not only is that song still around and going strong, but it turns out that the local labor council holds a memorial there every year. So that's workers not just remembering history, but they're actively keeping it alive. And so I feel like stuff that's happening on the cultural level is really incredibly important.
Can I just say, jazz labor opera? I mean,
thought you'd like that.
three of my favorite things in the world. If they serve pizza, I would have to move in with them, because that is, I really look forward to seeing that show. I hope it comes to the greater Washington area. I hope it gets a wider exposure. That really sounds fantastic. So thanks for lifting that up. That's one of the great values of the Labor Heritage Foundation, is you just find these little artistic, cultural gems that are out there that we don't otherwise hear about, because obviously they wouldn't be a part of what a big commercial enterprise would do. I don't think we can expect to see that show at the Trump Kennedy Center anytime soon, for example. That would be just an illustration of that point. Okay, so I'm going to actually take moderator's prerogative, not only to offer my own backward-looking news story, but I'm also going to break my own rule. In this way, I'm going to talk about a story that is of absolutely no importance to workers, worker power unions at all. And it is that the labor secretary was forced out of her job. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez DeRemer was forced to step down from her job. She was caught up in a whole bunch of scandals that are frankly just too disgusting to expose our audience to. You can read about them in such, tabloids as the New York Times or the Washington Post if you would like. She was just not a good boss. Let's put that mildly. She was not a good boss. It was just not, I really don't want to get into it, but she is now out. And Keith Sonderling, who is the Deputy Secretary of Labor, has ascended to be the acting Secretary of Labor. And that will have absolutely no effect on workers anywhere in America except in the Labor Department, the people who have the misfortune of having to work with Secretary Chavez Durimer. No workers will be affected from a policy perspective, from an enforcement perspective, because the Labor Department will keep doing what it has been doing all along. She played only a very, very limited role in the department. She basically spent her time traveling around the country, both for legitimate and illegitimate reasons. And I think she'll probably be, a lot of labor secretaries have been forgotten in history. I think I will be one of those who's forgotten in history. But for goodness gracious, we've already forgotten her. This will probably be the last thing that will be said about Lori Chavez Durimer because she meant absolutely nothing in that department, had no impact whatsoever. And that leads us into
I would argue that Julie Wu is actually having a profound impact on the city of New York. And you can see the role she's playing in making labor front and center in New York, bringing the context and connecting the mayor with labor. So that they're an example of a labor secretary who is not going to be forgotten. And is
right, still, absolutely. Julie Su playing an important role as deputy mayor, a brand new position created for her by Mayor Mamdani. She was a very impactful acting secretary of labor, and she's, I think, having a tremendous effect in New York. It's not often that local government plays a critically important role in labor rights and labor organizing, but Julie is playing a great role there. I'm immensely proud of the work that she's doing there. So yeah, her legacy is going to live on. She's been Secretary of Labor in two places, and now she's playing an equivalent role in New York City. It's really an interesting contrast to the former Secretary of Labor, the most recent former Secretary of Labor. All right, topic number 2, what's coming next? Guests, get out your crystal balls. We're going to look into the future. We're not looking to 2086. We're looking next few weeks, next few months, next few years. What will be the most important story or the most important development or innovation or an important event that is going to affect workers, worker power, and unions in the near-term future? Michael.
So I know we're all waiting with bated breath for the Supreme Court's unitary executive decision. And while everybody is pretty sure how they think the Supreme Court will come out on that, if they were so certain, I don't know why we haven't had that decision already. It was that easy. They've been talking about it. Shouldn't be one of those controversial decisions that they leave to the very end of the term and then disappear off into the sunset, and everybody's talking about it in the summer. But for me, that decision is interrelated with, and I guess I keep mentioning this. I don't know why, being in Texas, I say this, but what is happening at the Fifth Circuit, and essentially the Fifth Circuit SpaceX ruling, where they declared the NLRB unconstitutional, and then the NLRB refused to challenge that decision to the Supreme Court, and the union that intervened tried to, and just recently the Supreme Court denied them again the opportunity to intervene to appeal that decision, which kind of leaves the whole Fifth Circuit decision in limbo. Even if the Supreme Court says there's a unitary executive, how are we going to deal with the NLRA and the Fifth Circuit decision, which says administrative law judges can't decide these decisions unless the president can remove them without cause, and the NLRB members can be removed without cause? I think once we get the unitary executive decision that is not the NLRB case, but says the president can do this, the real issue after that decision, how does the NLRB function? The only answer to me is Congress has to step in and clarify how it works, and I doubt that will ever happen. So,
Yeah, I think that's let me say, an excellent prediction. Ever might be a little bit too strong, but certainly not anytime soon. Let me just clarify for our audience, the decision that you're talking about is Federal Trade Commission versus Slaughter.
Yes.
Commissioner Slaughter was a member of the Federal Trade Commission, and President Trump fired her. But it also has implications for Gwen Wilcox, who was a member of the National Labor Relations Board, and President Trump fired her. In both of those cases, the Supreme Court overturned the injunctions that kept those two officials in place. They are both now out of office. And what we're waiting to see is whether or not the Supreme Court is going to say that the people who lead independent agencies, the multi-member commissions, boards, others who lead independent agencies like the NLRB and the SEC and the Federal Trade Commission, can be fired by the president for cause, even though Congress has said, can be fired by the president without cause, even though Congress has said that there must be just cause in order to be able to fire those individuals. So those people are now out of jobs, and we're waiting, as Michael said, we're waiting to see how the Supreme Court decides this case. The basis on which the Fifth Circuit said the NLRB and the NLRA are unconstitutional is this issue. Yes. And this issue, and also whether or not ALJs can have just cause job protections, administrative law judges. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not the Supreme Court takes that on in this decision. I'm writing a piece right now that's related to this topic. And let me just say, this is a complicated area of law, and the Supreme Court really risks doing even worse damage than merely the firing of an NLRB member or the firing of an FTC member. They can really screw things up if they're not really careful about how they do this. So I think they are trying to take care, which means probably that the decision will be written by Chief Justice Roberts. And my guess is they're fighting about it ferociously internally, because you have a right flank, you have a left flank, and then you have, I don't know what you call the people who are not in either of those two flanks. They're certainly not moderates. None of those people there are no moderates on the United States Supreme Court. And there probably would have been a time when Elena Kagan would have been called a moderate, but those days are long gone.
And I do want to mention one briefly. Oh, go ahead, Kay. Go ahead, Kay.
This country being, without a regulatory state, it's probably not the NLRB case that's going to do it, but there's going to be a case where the meat is poisoned or the water is, and we have massive deaths, and that it's going to take that dramatic effect of what happens when we no longer have a functioning regulatory state. And that's very extreme, but I imagine that's what it would take to get Congress to act.
Yeah, I think you're right. Michael?
I just to clarify, and I realize I feel like I'm talking to my friends, so I don't give some of the background sometimes. But my real concern is that this decision, the FTC decision on the unitary executive, is not going to deal with the morass for the NLRB, because you don't actually have the Gwen Wilcox decision up in front of the Supreme Court. So the Fifth Circuit decision will still be the law of the land even after the FTC decision, and that just delays resolving this for a long time for me. It's like, what do workers in the Fifth Circuit think if they can file an unfair labor practice charge and every employer can just run in and say, you can't do this, you're unconstitutional?
Yeah, no, that's an extremely important point, All right, Chris, look into the future. Tell us what's coming down the pike.
I'm going to do mine real quick because I know we're running out of time. No surprise, I think labor is going to lean more into culture, storytelling, film, music, TikTok as a way to reach people who aren't in unions yet. And I have one very quick example that just came in over the weekend. Unite Here is doing a brand new art residency. That's what I said, art residency from the hotel workers. Is going to launch in Detroit. They're bringing rank and file union members together for a month to develop their creative voices. It's completely unusual. It's fabulous. They're going to pay them. They're going to have time off for their job. And the idea is simple but powerful. Help workers tell their own stories, build confidence, and connect across unions. And the deadline to apply, by the way, May 15th, details laborheritage.org. Check it out.
That is fantastic. I did not know about that. That is absolutely terrific. And let me just say, Absolutely everybody, both in the world of politics and in the world of labor and in the world of advocacy generally, is talking about narrative, talking about storytelling. That is the big theme right now because, these big didactic pitches that people give are not persuasive. It's personal stories that really are most persuasive. And I think the labor movement has known that for decades. That's the role of the organizer, and it's the role of worker organizers in telling their own stories. All right, Kate, what's coming our way in the future?
I think, and it ties with the things that Michael brought up, is that there is a debate starting to happen in the labor movement about, maybe we need to rethink what we do in terms of first contracts and the way organizing has been going smaller, moving to nonprofits. But that if we're really going to have power, we're going to have to organize big places. And Chris Brooks has been writing about this, and Jacobin, others are talking about it, that labor is going to have to just rethink everything because they cannot rely on the NLRB. What are they going to do? And this tendency to look for wins rather than to take on the big fights, I think there's going to be a shift.
Very interesting. How do you think that shift manifests itself? Give us an example of what do you think that looks like? So
without question, we had an 80% win rate last year, and very small numbers. The unit size went down. I think unions are going to start thinking, maybe organizing the staff, the 4-person staff of a Democratic congressperson is not going to build labor's power, and that they have to take on fights that, whether it's Google or Amazon or Starbucks or the meatpacking industry, that those are the fights that matter. You have to take on global capital, and maybe you lose some fights along the way, but you can't. That's the only way you're going to build power.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. All right. This is everybody's favorite segment. It's time for shameless plugs and shout outs. Each guest will get a minute and a half to plug or shout out anything or anyone they would like. Chris Garlock, what is can I just say, you're very good at building the products into the movie, right? That product placement. You always do that brilliantly, but here it is, an outright shameless plug or shout out. Go ahead, Chris.
So you are totally right, and I did kind of sneak in already a shameless plug for our new labor landmarks database, laborheritage.org. But let me add a very proud shout out for the annual DC Labor Film Fest. I know you love it, Seth. Yeah, you love it.
I do love it.
It launches this Friday, May Day, right here in Washington, D.C. It is probably our strongest lineup yet. We start out with a behind-the-scenes portrait of activist journalist Amy Goodman, her fight to tell the stories corporate media won't touch. We've got a savage, dark satire about a laid-off worker who takes job competition to deadly extremes. And then we've got Charlie Chaplin and Idiocracy. So, something for everyone.
Wow. Can I just say that DC Labor Film Fest is a pleasure. And if you haven't been to the AFI Theater in Silver Spring, Maryland, those of you who are in the greater Washington area, this is your opportunity to go. It's a great theater. It's a great lineup. And Chris is a terrific host. Chris, really, really appreciate you bringing that up. Kate Bronfenbrenner, your shameless plug or shout out.
I want to give a shout out to the city of Ithaca, which is continuing its effort to get just cause for all workers in the city, not just one type of worker, despite the Chamber's of Commerce's argument that it should exclude small workplaces. I'm going to be testifying at the council tomorrow about this issue, and I think it's important. It's important one that you've written a lot about, Seth, and I think that in places where less than 10% of the workforce is organized, it becomes even more important. So we need just cause matters for union organizing, just cause matters for protection when we lose the regulatory state. It matters.
Yeah, just cause matters for having productive workplaces, right? Firing people because you hate their guts is not adding to productivity. I think it matters tremendously. Thanks for doing that. Thank you for testifying. That's a great thing. Michael Z. Green, what's your shameless plug or shout out?
All right. I do struggle with this word shameless and trying to plug some things. But and I know Seth knows this, maybe Kate knows a little bit about it too, but this struggle we as law professors sometimes have in submitting our works to student edited journals and getting them to think that what we're saying might be of some value. And now being at a very top tier law school that really cares about where I get published and all this stuff, I have the unusual situation where I have three law review articles all coming out. They've all come out within just the last few weeks. So I thought I would mention all three of them and just mention just a one-liner about each. And then the last one, which I'm most proud of, and I think it's the one that really relates to what we're talking about. But the first one is called Arbitration in Name Only, a Race Claims Mismatch. It's at the 27 Cardozo Journal of Conflict Resolution 235. It's about the Brian Flores case, the football coach who was able to get around the NFL's decision to try and make him arbitrate his discrimination claims. So I have some thoughts on that. I did an article that is in the Ohio State Journal of Dispute Resolution that looks at the Federal Arbitration Act at its 100-year anniversary and what it has done in terms of race claims for Black claimants and what that means. But then the last one, in the American University Law Review, 75 American University Law Review 1219, Black Labor Matters. That's the title of it. I address the intersection of issues and something Kate mentioned too. If we don't have the law to help us right now, what do workers at their most vulnerable situation do? And I do an intersection between Black labor issues in terms of anti-diversity challenges and things they need to do, and then the anti-worker movement, starting with Project 2025 and all the things that are anti-union and how those groups should work together at local area management and focus to resolve their disputes. That's it.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm looking forward to reading those. All right. I'm going to take moderator's prerogative again with my own shout out. And I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Bill Herbert, who is a distinguished lecturer and the executive director of the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education and the Professions at Hunter College in New York. Bill unexpectedly died on April 19th. He was a young 70 years old. He had just provided over yet another successful National Center National Conference in March. He really built that institution to be the leading voice on academic labor, the leading research arm for academic labor, and he was quoted essentially everywhere. There was a discussion of academic labor, unions in higher education. Bill was there, and he had something to add to the conversation. I had the privilege of meeting Bill back when he was a lawyer for the Civil Service Employees Association, which is an affiliate of AFSCME. He also served as the deputy chair of New York State's Public Employee Relations Board, which is the NLRB for state and local governments in New York State. Bill was just a wonderful, smart, savvy guy who, I got to say, he seemingly knew absolutely everybody in our field. I mean, he was really something. He just had amazing personal connections, and that's why these conferences were so successful. Hundreds and hundreds of people would come into New York City for these conferences. So I also want to say Bill was always generous with me personally. He was generous with Power at Work. He appeared on Power at Work a couple of times. He will be very sorely missed. He's a voice that we need now more than ever when academic labor is under attack and is growing at the same time. So let me just say rest in power to our friend Bill Herbert. Audience, stick with us if you can. We're going to begin Power Half Hour's overtime in just a minute. For Michael Green, Kate Bronfenbrenner, Chris Garlock, and our producer, Ayush Kanvolkar, thank you for joining the Power Half Hour. We're going to do overtime in just a second, but in the meantime, class is dismissed. Okay, guests, take a breath, take a sip of something, whatever you like. Try and keep it soft. No, none of that hard, none of that stuff that you get in Fort Worth back behind a building there, Michael.
You mean wait, you mean none of the stuff that the former Secretary of Labor used to drink in the middle of the afternoon? Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not going to comment on the former Secretary of Labor. I've said everything I have to say.
You are too good.
Okay, audience, we are ready for the Power Half Hour's overtime. If you have a question and you're in our live audience right now, go ahead and post it over on LinkedIn. Ayush will go over there and he'll keep an eye on it. You can comment right on this live stream that's available on LinkedIn. You can also send your comments in or questions in between our episodes at poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. That's poweratwork at the BURNES center.org. We will save your question for our next panel. If you send it by email, we can't ask it today, but you can always post it if you're with us live over on LinkedIn. But we're going to start with the questions we received before the episode began, and I'll just take them in order. Michael, this is actually picking up on something that you said, I think maybe gently disagreeing with something you said, not really, but sort of give you a chance to start, and then Kate and Chris, if you want to jump in. So here's the question. I get the feeling not much has changed at the NLRB. I don't hear about cases being decided or major new anti-worker regulations or announcements. The only time the NLRB seems to make news is when it says that Amazon is breaking the law. Am I missing something, or are things at the NLRB not going as badly as we feared?
I find that kind of an interesting question. The news that Amazon is violating the law was not really the issue to me. It was more that, and we're going to appeal this to the Fifth Circuit so that we can, reject that Amazon is breaking the law. But I think what's happening at the NLRB, and I would tell you, I've been on some LinkedIn conversations or whatever, and I'm just dumbfounded. I'd like to understand what is actually happening at the NLRB in the Fifth Circuit. If I am a Texas worker and I want to file an unfair labor practice charge, can't the employer just say unconstitutional? And to me, that means it's a non-starter. You have no rights in this area. So to address the question, I think, there are really bad things going on at the NLRB. I don't think the actual officials and the hard workers there at the NLRB can actually say anything like, "Oh no, we agree with you. We don't like this." They can't say that. But just the fact that when in the SpaceX decision that they refused to even try and appeal that they were unconstitutional says everything to me. So
yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Kate or Chris, you want to jump in on this one?
I mean, it's important to point out that the NLRB wasn't working for the first part of Trump's term, and as someone who's been watching the NLRB every time a new president comes in, it takes a while for things to happen, but there's some important things that have already happened. And one of them, which, besides that unions are not filing unfair labor practices because of just what Michael brought up, is the board changed the way unfair labor practices are filed, requiring that the worker has to answer all these questions and fill out a form. So when, unorganized workers have charges where they haven't connected with the union yet, or local unions who aren't, familiar with the best way to fill out an unfair labor practice charge. It used to be that the board agent did the investigation and did the preparation, and now the burden is on workers, and that just makes an extra hoop. It makes it harder. It's going to intimidate some workers. Some unfair labor practices are going to be thrown back because they weren't filled out right, and that's one more negative development. And the other thing is that we're seeing, we already see things like the reversal of the CEMEX decision. Changes moving on joint employer, all the things that their list of things corporations want. And every time a Republican board comes in, the employers have their list and they get them, and it switches. So I think we're just seeing the beginning, but we're also seeing unions avoiding the board.
Yeah. That's common in Republican administrations, is that because you have a hostile board that's not going to decide cases the way you want them to be decided, the union movement just doesn't use the NLRB. They try to do their organizing in other ways. I think what the questioner is sort of reflecting is that there have not been a lot of most of the Biden board precedents have not yet been overturned. And that's Kate's point, that it just takes time. Things have to burble up to the board itself so that they can vote on it. That's one of the reasons why the business community is having a fit about the fact that Dave Prouty's term ends in August, because if he leaves, not that they want him on the board, they don't like him, they don't support him, but if he leaves the board, they don't have a quorum anymore, and they can't make those kinds of decisions. But the example that you gave, Kate, is a really, really good one of the kinds of things that that government agencies can do to undermine worker power, worker rights, worker access to justice, that we just never hear about, that are very sort of below the radar screen. They don't make it onto the even into Twitter. They don't make, or whatever it's called now, or Blue Sky, or they don't make it onto Threads. They don't make it into the newspapers. They don't make it onto television. And so folks don't really hear about it. But when a worker goes to the NLRB, they experience what you're describing. It's a very, very important point. Okay, let me go to the next question. Chris, this one might be a little bit more fitting for you. The Writers Guild membership overwhelmingly ratified their agreement with the Hollywood studios without a strike. I believe the vote was something like better than 90%, which is pretty common when it's a good contract. It's pretty rare that you get a closer vote than that. So they ratified. There was no strike. Has America? Oh, this is such an aspirational question. I'm uplifted just by the question. Has America achieved labor peace in the entertainment industry?
Oh, geez. One hates to pop the balloon, right, Seth?
Yeah. This is a person with a lot of hope.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to leave it to you, Michael, and Kate for a more, I think, sort of technical answer. But I mean, I think in comparison to like the screenwriters strike and some of the other stuff that we've seen, I mean, you guys know, I mean, most of the time, this is exactly what happens. It's stuff that doesn't make headlines. It's only because we've had some really high profile strikes in recent years that when there's a routine, I think, but yeah, I think things have been changing, but I'm not sure I would go, 100% aspirational on this. No.
Yeah. Kate or Michael, do you want to jump in on that?
Well, I think it's important to understand. First of all, there is this principle that Chris brought up, that when you have a big strike, a strike with lots of tension and whatever, that employers lost a lot of money in the last Writers Guild strike and the entertainment industry strike, so that they are going to be more interested in settlement. They thought that they were going to win last time, and they didn't. But also, this is a very bad time for the entertainment industry. They are losing money. There are these mergers that are very, very detrimental. I think that, and they have an administration that is hostile to the entertainment industry. I think that we will see another big strike. This is not a good time to strike. I don't think this reflects good relationships. I think this shows that the union has some power. The unions have some power, but this is not the time to have that fight, and they're going to use it down the road. Certainly we know that, for instance, AI is a huge, huge issue that is still needs a lot of work in the industry. So I do not think there's labor peace. I think that there's some power has been flexed, and the power has been on the side of the union.
Yeah, so I want to enthusiastically agree with what you just said, Kate, is that it's sort of peace for now, and the moment is what's causing there to be peace, not that there is some kind of balance that's been struck between labor and management in the entertainment industry. The Hollywood studios and those who own them, the few who own them, are always going to try and squeeze out profits, and a lot of that is going to end up coming from labor. and labor is always going to fight for its own interests to the extent that it's able to do that, has the power to do that. But the confluence, is Kate's point is exactly right. The confluence of the studios getting their butts kicked in the last strike, both strikes, the Screen Actors Guild strike and the Writers Guild strike, and the economic sort of slowdown that we're experiencing in the country and the significant recession that we're seeing in the entertainment industry, along with corporate consolidation and the outsourcing of a lot of the work, the labor fight is not really at the bargaining table right now. It's happening at the corporate level and in the offshoring work that's being done. So I think it's a little too aspirational to say that because there was no strike and because we got a quick contract that was overwhelmingly ratified, that's a signal that that nirvana has arrived and the halcyon days are here. A little bit too enthusiastic, let's just say. Okay, let me go to the third. Oh, well, the third one I can answer really, really quickly because it's about what I was just talking about. Is anything going to change now that the Secretary of Labor was forced out of office? No. Fourth question. Oh, yeah, this is a good question because I don't actually know the answer. I have a sense, but not a good sense. Does anyone know what's happening in the lawsuits filed by the federal employee unions to block Trump's executive order that took away collective bargaining rights? So President Trump issued an executive order asserting a provision in the Federal Sector Labor Relations Act that allows the president to exempt national security and intelligence employees from collective bargaining. And President Trump basically exempted about 1 million workers from collective bargaining all throughout the government. I mean, I think almost every agency was touched, if not every single one. Folks in the Agriculture Department, folks in Health and Human Services, folks obviously in the Defense Department and DHS and others. So as you might imagine, the union sued to try and overturn that executive order. Does anybody have I know a little bit, but not a lot here. Does somebody want to jump in with more?
Well, I will say that, I've been tracking that a little bit. And one of the arguments in one of the executive orders is national security is the basis for cutting off a lot of those collective bargaining agreements, which is an arguable issue in terms of national security for all of those agencies. But what I will say about that is I do believe that the unitary executive decision we talked about will also impact that, the ultimate decisions there, because it gets to how broad the president's powers are, and challenging those issues, I think, will be an issue. And I will highlight just recently, there was something that came out from the Federal Mediation Conciliation Services related to this, where if unions who are subject to those executive orders, where the president has canceled their collective bargaining agreements, if they're in the middle of disputes and they go to FMCS and ask for an arbitrator panel, FMCS is now taking the position it will not provide an arbitrator panel unless both sides agree. And the government is saying we can't because of the executive order, which has caused a little bit of uproar in the arbitrator community too, because most of those people are on these panels. And so this is just a way to get out of using FMCS completely for resolving the underlying disputes, because that's another way to resolve these issues in terms of the questioner. They're talking about how it's getting resolved in the courts, but there are some arbitration decisions that are also trying to address some of these things.
Yeah.
I don't know the details, but I know that the AFGE just won the case about the VA workers, and they got,
yes.
Obviously that's being appealed, but they, at this point, right, the union won that the VA workers shouldn't lose their collective bargaining rights. So that what does that mean in the long term? We don't know, but I think it's going by department. These cases are being filed, and they're being filed in different districts, different courts, and the decisions are going different ways. But that was AFGE saw that as a big victory.
Yeah, and it was. It was the other case. The case there is a case that is directly. There are actually a couple of cases that are directly aimed at the Trump National Security Executive Order. And the last piece of news that I saw about that was, and I think this happened last month, is that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit lifted the injunction that had sort of put a hold on Trump's executive order, which. Now, they weren't making a merits decision. They weren't saying this executive order is perfectly fine, it's consistent with the law. What they were saying was the injunction was put in place inappropriately, and it was then remanded back to the district court for a decision. So we haven't got a final decision on the President Trump's executive order, as far as I know. So that they're going to keep fighting that out. It's going to take quite some time before we get a final decision on the executive order. And the only intriguing thing that I would say is that even though that's the case, even though the president issued the executive order early in 2025, federal sector union membership went up in 2025, not down. I think that's because a lot of workers finally realized that they are under grave threat, and the unions were advocating for them. They're the only ones who are really fighting for them. The unions and allies like Democracy Forward, who are doing a great job litigating these cases. And those cases turn primarily not on the question of whether Trump went beyond his power under the statute, but whether or not it was a violation of the First Amendment, because the president, in the executive order, said these people don't agree with us, and therefore we're going to get rid of the unions. The unions don't agree with us, so we're going to get rid of the unions. My version of the Constitution says that's not allowed, but let me just say, I'm not sure I have the up-to-date version of the United States Constitution.
None of us
okay.
do.
Yeah, I know. It's ever, as Michael was saying, it's ever changing. And so, I feel like I should actually have, maybe we should have a Constitution wiki so we can all sort of update each other on where the law really is. All right, that is our last question. Thank you very much to Michael, Kate, and Chris for being with us. Thank you, audience, for being with us for the Power Half Hour. We will see you in 2 weeks. For the next episode, we'll be live on LinkedIn at noon on Tuesday. I don't know what date it is. Let's call it, I'm going to make it up. It's May 12th, if that's the Tuesday. I don't think that's right, but it might be. And we will post that on Power at Work for Posterity, of course, so you can get it there anytime. This episode will be on poweratwork.us. You can watch it there. If you missed anything, if you were taking notes and you missed something for your notes, come and take another look. So thank you very much, audience. Thank you very much, guests. We'll see you on Power at Work again very soon.
Thank you.
Are you looking for more labor radio shows and podcasts? Well, look no further. Go to the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The network connects more than 200 radio shows and podcasts. To find more great labor content, go to www.laborradionetwork.org. Power at Work is there. You should be too.